In business, handwritten signatures are required on nearly every document. However, in the wake of the COVID-19 outbreak, it has become almost impossible to obtain multiple original handwritten signatures on the same document. But the need to keep the economy going means that we need to find ways to continue to do business. To explain how this can be achieved, we are joined by Karl Blom from Webber Wentzel. Welcome, Karl, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Samita.
Karl, can you tell us, in terms of the electrical signatures that can be used during lockdown, what is the law requirements on this and how is this possible during these times?
I think it's important to always remember for your viewers that typically under our law, an electronic signature is the same as an ordinary signature unless a very certain set of circumstances applies. So first, you must actually decide, do you need a signature in the first place? Most agreements in South Africa are done orally. If you go to a supermarket and buy any kinds of goods, all those agreements can be done without any kind of signature at all. You just pay for your goods and leave. So you must look at the very specific set of circumstances where you actually need to have a signature in the first place. So then you must consider, well, does the law say I can't use a signature at all electronically? Must I use a handwritten signature? And there are very few circumstances where that's the case. Really, those are wills, the sale of land, and one or two unique circumstances prescribed by law. So for most of your viewers, that won't be applicable. What becomes more relevant is where a signature is required by law to be in writing. So what the Electronic Communications and Transaction Act says, which is the governing law for electronic signatures, is that where an act of parliament requires a document to be signed in writing, you can only meet that requirement if you use what we call an advanced electronic signature. If an act doesn't specify that document must be signed in writing, you can use what we call an ordinary electronic signature. So again, it will always depend on the particular transaction that you're dealing with. But for the most part, most agreements are not required to be in writing under our law, which as a consequence means that an ordinary electronic signature can be used for those agreements. So then we ask, well, what is an ordinary electronic signature? An ordinary electronic signature can be anything that associates the signatory, so let's say me in this case, and indicates that I've agreed to whatever it is I'm applying my signature to. So there's been case law, for example, where just an email signature, so parties agreed to cancel an agreement, they did so via email and their signatures appeared at the bottom of the email. That was deemed to be a signature for purposes of our law, because there you can see who the person is and that they've agreed to something in the same way that you could with a handwritten signature. The two are, suppose, analogous in our law. So for your viewers, there are a number of ways you could do this type of signature. You could do a handwritten signature that you scan into a document. You could take your name and a WhatsApp message, either saying, I agree to this, Karl Blom, here's my ID number below. So there are many ways in which you can fulfill this requirement. Where it gets complicated for most of your viewers and for most people typically is where the law requires the signature to be in writing, which, as I say, we're talking very few types of agreements actually require that. So let's say a suretyship agreement, for example. In that case, you need to use a signature that's been accredited by the South African Accreditation Authority to be an advanced electronic signature, just because they're more secure than typical signatures, both handwritten and electronic. Now, in that case, there are only really two options available. There's a company called Law Trust who's been accredited, and the South African Post Office has a signature that's been accredited. Beyond that, there are no other accredited signatures currently in South Africa. But like I said in the first instance, for the bulk of transactions, so for the sale of most goods, for most contracts, an ordinary electronic signature should be fine. So what your viewers can do is they go, what practical steps can we take to make sure that this signature is legitimate in the same way that they would for any other signature? And there are simple things you could do. You could say, for example, if both parties have Skype, you could sign the document over Skype together while talking to each other. So if there's ever a dispute, well, then of course you can say that I witnessed him sign the document. I watched him sign it over video. You could also, for example, confirm over phone call, say, do you agree? Yes. Because remember, for most agreements, if you agree to it orally, it's still a binding agreement. And the written agreement really is this evidence of what you've agreed orally. So you don't even require a signature in the first place. So whether it's electronic or a wet ink signature, as you may call it, they're equally binding. So I do think that for most businesses, the key thing to determine is that, is there a particular law that says I can't sign this document electronically at all? And like I said, those are extremely rare. You will then go, well, are there any requirements in law that this agreement must be in writing? And then if the answer there is no, it can be done orally or doesn't have to be in writing at all, then you can use any type of electronic signature you like, whether you do it via email, whether you sign a PDF, whether you approach a third-party service provider. All of those circumstances will be valid for our law.
In terms of safety and taking precautions against fraud, what suggestions do you have?
So there are a number of suggestions there, and really it's probably important to emphasize that we're talking about the same suggestions you may want to take for a handwritten signature. You wouldn't trust a signature that's just been sent by itself in the post to you. You'd want to go, well, how do I know this signature is actually, that belongs to the person who it purports to belong to? And so there you can take a number of practical steps to try and safeguard yourself. So for example, if you're dealing with a particular person, you may go, you can accept this agreement electronically, but it must come from, let's say, ryan.smith@companyname.com. Because then if the email comes from anyone else, well, then you can go, well, this seems quite peculiar because this isn't the email address we agreed. You may also say that we want to specify that you must sign the agreement, scan it, and send it back, as opposed to just over email, because that introduces another layer of verification. You could agree, for example, that you may not use an intermediary, so a person can't send it to her secretary, who would then send it on to you. They must send it to you directly, and you can respond directly to confirm. Or like I said, you could phone them over video call, over telephone, and just go, just to confirm, is this the correct, is this you? And don't phone the number at the bottom of the email which you receive it from. Phone them from a number you have saved for them separately. Because in that case, you aren't relying on the email to prove itself. You have a separate line by which to authenticate it. So if you ever do get to a point, as you would for an ordinary signature, where someone goes, I didn't sign this, it wasn't me, you could appear before a court and say, well, it came from their email address, as we agreed. It has their handwritten signature, which they scanned to me as agreed. I phoned them afterwards to make sure it was them, and it came directly from them. It didn't come through an intermediary. And it would be very hard in that case for anyone to prove that their signature wasn't valid.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your time today, Karl.
Thank you so much for having me. All the best to you and your viewers.
Thank you.